Hello, I'm Mark Cantor. I'm an addiction interventionist in Boca Raton, Florida, and Washington, D.C. I'm the author of How to Do an Intervention, a step-by-step guide for parents, and the host of this YouTube channel, Recovery Talk. If you want to stay current on all things addiction, subscribe now. Today, I have the distinct honor of introducing Rick Hubbard. Rick is the Executive Vice President of Professional Relations at Origins Behavioral Healthcare in Dallas and also in South Florida. Rick has been a professional in the addiction treatment space since 2002 and is a licensed chemical dependency counselor intern. Rick's career started in banking and real estate, like mine. And Rick, thanks for joining me today.
It's a pleasure, Mark. Thanks for having me.
So the big question is, how do you go from banking and real estate to to the addiction treatment field? You know, we say that, you know, what's wrong with us that got us here? You know, what this is a special adventure for special people. And so what got you here?
Well, Mark, as you mentioned, I worked for many years in commercial banking, mostly real estate finance. From that, I kind of morphed into, you know, real estate investments and commercial real estate to some extent, but mostly finance. Mm-hmm. That journey worked real well for me for many years. So I thought.
And was that in Texas? Was that in Texas or?
It was. It was in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's where I was born and raised. That's where I went to school, and that's, you know, where I planted my roots. And for many years, life was going along quite well, on the surface at least. I was real successful in the work that I did. My personal life started to, take a detour of sort around the mid 80s. Mm-hmm. In the 90s, things were getting really heated up in the real estate market here. And I had opened my own operation. I was in the mortgage banking business in the 90s and had a lot of home builders that I was financing new homes for. And things were going along quite well. Mm-hmm. But along with that success in my work, also there was a lot of partying going on, a lot of entertaining. I did a lot of entertaining, hosting events for professionals in my field, and a lot of the folks in that field, like to do what I did for recreation. Yeah.
Were those the boom years in Texas for commercial real estate?
Yeah, so I've gone through, several cycles, and we had a bubble in the late 80s with the financial institutions because of the crash of real estate and oil prices in the 80s. So went the banking industry, and so I've seen a lot of ups and downs, and I was able to do okay during those cycles, on the upside and on the downside. I've always had a gift for being able to make the right moves at the right time, maybe just through luck, or perhaps a power greater than me looking out for me in a way that I didn't even realize was happening. But I thought it was me. So, I took credit for it. And
I may have been a little bit you, I'm sure.
I was trained well in this business. And, I started my first job in the finance business in the 70s. So, I've been around a while, and I've had a lot of experience. But that experience also co-occurred, so to speak, with a lot of partying during that entire period of time in my life. And, it was a very high pressure, fast paced kind of scene. And so, to keep up, I did what everybody else did. And that was a lot of cocaine and a lot of alcohol. Mm-hmm. And, like I said earlier, that seemed to work well for a while. I was I was married. My daughter was born in '83. Her mom didn't have to work. She was always in private schools, had the best of everything. I threw great parties for her. She had great birthday parties as a kid, awesome parties. But somewhere around the mid 90s, 95 or 96, emotionally and spiritually, things started to really get compromised for me. Even though I had done fairly well financially, I had not taken very good care of my financial life. I was a bit reckless and ended up in a lot of debt to the government, to the IRS. And, the pressure of dealing with that and all the other business related pressure just kept me in that cycle, getting caught up. And then it was no longer a party. I was drinking and using when I didn't want to. I was doing it just to cope and just to deal with the stress and the pressure and the fear and the anxiety. And, my descent was a very gradual, very slow, almost imperceptible descent until I got really close to the bottom. And then I realized I'm in trouble and I can't get out. And I was powerless to do anything to stop the descent, though. And I ended up losing everything that was dear to me. Lost my business. My wife pretty much had enough, and so she had a teenage daughter to look after. Thank God she was there to look after my daughter, and so I ended up moving in with my mother at 45 years old. At 46, my mother said, okay, enough of this. You're getting out of here. You're going to go somewhere and get well. My mother had, gone through a lot. My dad had passed away in '89. And she had helped me launch, my business after the bank failed. The bank that I was working for failed. And I started my own mortgage brokerage, and then later got a mortgage banking operation, partnered up with a guy, and was doing fairly well. And she worked with me. She answered the phones. She'd make lunch from time to time. She looked after me, but she also noticed that I was in trouble, but she never said anything.
Right.
She never said anything. In fact, there were a lot of people, I suspect, close to me that knew I was in trouble, but out of fear, they didn't say anything.
Yeah.
And I knew I was in trouble 10 years before I ever got help. Yeah. And somewhere around 1997 and 98, I had a lot of legal trouble, a lot of lawsuits, and life just got really, really complicated. And I ended up losing everything, just everything. So here I am in my 40s, in my mid 40s, living at home with my mother, who I had been taking care of. Now all of a sudden she has to take care of me again. Take care of you, yeah. Because in those, she gave birth to me and she took care of me as a child. Now all of a sudden, at a time in her life when she needed me to look after her, she was having to take care of me. And she said to me one day, "Hey, listen, I'm not going to watch you just die like this. You're going to have to do something, and you're going to have to do it now. I'm going to find help for you, and you're going to go away from here, and you're going to get it right, and don't come back here until you do." And she had never spoken to me that way, ever. And I looked in her eyes as I was looking down at her because she was a little bitty thing. But she meant business, and I knew when I saw in her eyes how serious she was, that this was I had to get it right. Yeah. And so I went to treatment.
Where'd you go to treatment?
West Texas. I went to treatment at a nonprofit in West Texas, in Abilene, Texas. And I left my mother's home on May 10th. I drank and used coke the day before.
Mm-hmm.
And on the 10th, a friend of hers drove me to Abilene. And Abilene is about 2.5 hours from where I live in Fort Worth.
Mm-hmm.
And you go out I-20 and you just keep driving, and there's a lot of nothingness out there.
Mm-hmm.
And it seemed like the closer we got to Abilene, the hotter it got. It was in May, and it was very, very hot.
Mm-hmm.
And we had prayed the night before. And on my way to Abilene, I thought, wow, God, you sent me straight to hell, because it was so hot and it was so barren. And Abilene, beautiful people, but it is not a pretty place. It's an oil town. It's not a visually pretty place, but beautiful. And so I went to treatment there for about 40 days. I was referred to a sober living out there, a large sober living, co-ed, 100 beds.
Wow.
And it was a converted nursing home. And I stayed there. I didn't have any money. I didn't know I was going to need any money for anything like that. And when I called my mother to say, hey, I need some money for this sober living, she didn't believe me. She thought, because I had told so many lies to her before, she just didn't believe anything I said.
Right.
And she said, I'm going to send you $20 and that's it.
Yeah.
And I needed $75 a week for that sober living. And so I went to the guy.
How long were you there? How long were you in sober living?
I said I was going to stay for about 60 days. I was there for 1 year and 3 weeks.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I was there literally for 1 year and 3 weeks.
I always tell families that we want it to catch fire. We hope that when they're in treatment, it catches fire. So it really sounds like it caught fire for you, that you.
I fell in love. I fell in love with the whole idea of a spiritual path in my life. I didn't know what that was. I'd been raised in a religious household, and I had gone to church with my mother and my father, and we worshiped. My dad was not so much of a church guy, but I never saw my dad go to bed without getting on his knees and praying, ever. And but my dad drank big bottles of whiskey. This guy could drink, and but the concept of really relying on a power greater than myself was totally foreign to me. Yeah. I didn't know a power greater than me. And I'm not being facetious when I say that.
No, I same here. Yeah.
Yeah. I thought, and based on the people around me and the world that I was living in, I didn't know a power greater than me. I knew people that were wealthier, that appeared to be smarter, but I did not know anybody that was capable of outperforming me. And that's the way I thought. And so the whole idea and the concept of surrender and relying on something unseen, I can't touch it, I can't taste it, I can't smell it or quantify it. I can't place a value on it.
You have to believe in it.
That was a foreign concept. And so when I was able to take the steps, I took a third step, and I surrendered. And there was so much freedom in that. There was so much freedom. I didn't know where my life was going to go out of that. After that, there was some fear, but I knew that the life that I had created for myself was one that I did not want to go back to. And so I was willing to roll the dice, because for me, it was really about living or dying. I would have preferred death than to continue to live the way I was living. I just didn't have the courage to actually take my life. But, there were times when I actually wished that the world would end, and for everybody, not just me, because I was a coward like that. I just thought, if I die, they're going to be talking about me. So just everybody needs to die.
We all have to go.
I'm serious about that.
Yeah, no, I believe. So prior to your mother finding this treatment center in Abilene, Texas, did you know that help existed? Did you have a concept of that, or?
I did not. I didn't really understand what that meant. Now, I had a brother, and I say had a brother, Mike, my older brother was 5 years older. He passed away in 2005, a couple of years after I got sober, 3 years after, 4 years after I got sober. But Mike had been to treatment a couple of times.
So you'd
Back in
seen
the
it. You
80s.
had seen an example.
I had seen it, but I didn't really, it never really registered to me that it was something that would work for me. I knew I needed help. I didn't know what that help looked like. And quite frankly, when I was in treatment early on, and I realized that, the 12 steps in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous was a significant part of that program, I didn't buy into that because I had some really serious problems. I owed the IRS $264,000. My wife, who hadn't worked in all those years, was in an apartment, and she never, we lived in a nice house on a golf course with a country club membership, and here she was living in a 2-bedroom apartment with
and having
a teenage
to work.
daughter. Yeah, and having and so I was still trying to figure out a way to get back to where I was, because I felt like that's what I needed to do.
Right.
And
did you think the solution was about money?
Yeah, I needed more money.
Yeah.
I needed more money, and I needed the IRS off my back. If I could have done that, I'd been all right. But when I started really studying the big book and taking steps, I was a bit skeptical because I thought it was too simple. I've got these complicated problems, and there's nothing about my journey that these steps and this literature can help me with. And but I had no other choice, and I had a guy who kept a sponsor. I didn't call him a sponsor because I was too proud to call him a sponsor, but he kept telling me, you got nothing to lose. You have absolutely nothing to lose, dude. You need to try something else and listen to somebody else, because through your own energy and your own effort and your own knowledge, you have wrecked your life and the lives of some other people who care about you. And I heard that. I heard that. So
it's a powerful statement.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. And, I was at that place where I had gone so low, there was nowhere to go other than to reach up. And I was reaching up for help, and he helped me. And, I developed a relationship of trust with this God of my understanding. And after taking that third step, when I left treatment, I was in treatment with this guy whose dad owned a concrete construction company. And he had said, hey, when you get out of treatment, you can come to work with me. And he'd gotten out of treatment a couple of weeks before I did. And so when I got out, about a week or so went by, and I called him. And I said, yeah, I'm getting out in a couple of days. And he said, well, come on down on that Monday. So that Friday, I called him, and I said, I'll be down Monday. And I show up, and I've got some Dockers on, a button down shirt, and some Kohan loafers. And I walk into his construction office, and it's these guys standing around in jeans and boots, and they got dust and dirt on them. And I said, yeah, I'm here for Ricky. And he comes out, and he says, what are you doing, man? Where are your work clothes? And I said, well, what do I need? And he said, you need some boots, and you need some gloves. And I didn't have, so I had some Timberland boots, some suede Timberland boots, beautiful, chocolate brown. Those were the only boots I had. Yeah. And so I got a ride back to the halfway house, and I didn't have a car. And I put on my Timberlands, and the guy in the office had some gloves, and he gave me some gloves, and I went back down there. They gave me a hard hat. They said, you're going to go in this, they had different crews that go on different jobs. They said, you're going to go with these guys right here, and they're going to tell you what to do. And And none of these guys spoke English, but they pointed to a shovel and a pickaxe. And I knew what they were saying. They were speaking Spanish. I didn't understand it, but I knew what they were saying. They were saying, pick up that shovel and start digging.
Yeah. Yeah. They weren't saying run those numbers.
They were not. They weren't saying put together a marketing plan for me.
Right.
Yeah. And so I learned to use some very basic tools to do a very basic job, which was to dig ditches. And in Abilene, Texas, in June of 2001, I found myself in a ditch, miserable, thinking, God, you sent me straight to hell. Mm-hmm. And, really early on, praying to get out of that ditch.
Yeah.
But then realizing I had nowhere else to go if I got out of that ditch. And so then I started praying that God give me the courage and the perseverance to stay in that ditch and do that job so that I could pay my rent, so that I could stay sober and have a chance at life. And it was a tough thing, man. I was making $5.15 an hour.
Yeah.
And that's not enough to pay the interest on the debt that I had.
Right.
Not even enough to pay the interest.
Yeah. Wow. That's an incredible story. And thank you. It's very similar to my story. I think the only difference between your story and my story is that you were actually successful at some point, where I only thought I was successful at some point. But I was in commercial real estate, and I had these moments of success. They were good moments. I never accomplished the goals I wanted to, but I was very much someone who was living that fantasy also, and then was on that decline. And at first it's subtle, but then it's very quickly. When you start losing, it goes very quickly. But I had no concept of what treatment was. I didn't know before I was intervened on. I didn't know that there was help available for me. I didn't know what was wrong with me, because I was one of those guys. I've been walking around my whole life, just the hell's wrong with me, shaking my head. I was actually relieved when they said you're an addict and an alcoholic. I finally had something tangible that I could focus on and begin the recovery process.
Yeah, it was my experience as well. Being raised the way I was, I was raised to fear God, and that if you sinned, you were going to go to hell. And even though I saw a lot of sinning around me, the sinning that I did was the kind that I knew there was no redemption for me. Mm-hmm. And there was a certain amount of hopelessness in that. There was no hope in that. And so I used people and narcotics and alcohol to cope with the fact that I had such a low sense of self. I did, because I did a lot of other things. I hurt a lot of people. I was not faithful to my wife, and my daughter looked up to me, and I let her down, and I hurt people. And so the idea, the concept that I could find some redemption some kind of way, that I could be given a reprieve, was attractive to me. And when I was able to fully grasp the whole disease concept of addiction and understand that it is a disease, that I was not voluntarily hurting people. Much of it was involuntary. I may have been negligent, but I was not cruel.
Right. And you're not a bad person.
I'm not a bad guy.
Yeah, that was a big distinction for me. I went into treatment with the mindset, I'm a bad person. I'm a bad guy. And then, you're badly behaved, but you're not a bad person.
Yeah. Yeah, there was some relief in that, in knowing that, I could change, and there was a way for me to change. but that through my own power, I could not change, that I would have to enlist the help of a power greater than me. There was some freedom in that, and there was some fear in that. But I was, as I mentioned earlier, I was able to overcome the fear by looking at the alternative. The alternative for me was not living. It was not like going back to this thing, you know. During that period, I was living at my mother's house. I would leave and walk. I didn't have a car, and I didn't have a job. But here I am chasing this thing that's out on the streets. And there's a certain element of darkness out on those streets at night that has nothing to do with the sun and the moon.
Right.
And it's a deep spiritual darkness that has a life of its own. And I was dwelling in that darkness. And I could see in the daylight the office tower in downtown Fort Worth that my office was in. And it was a constant reminder of where my life had gone.
Wow. And so that's an incredible story. How long were you with the construction company? When did you evolve to the next stage?
Well, so my brother, Don, who is a great guy, he's 7 years older, Vietnam veteran, came back from Vietnam and made a life for himself, went through a lot of stuff in the 70s, but he's almost always worked for himself. But he was a builder. And you know, he built some commercial buildings, built a lot of homes. And so my work in construction was with him. He had, you know, he'd take on projects to remodel. He had a contract, I can remember when I was in high school, to remodel apartment complexes. And, you know, I worked for him doing that work for a couple of summers. And, you know, and he started building, he built my first house. He built my very first house in 1981. And so, you know, I've been exposed to that for many years through him. And then through my work at the bank, I financed a lot of construction, you know, all kinds of construction. And so it's something that's just been part of my orbit for many years.
And when did you get into the treatment business?
So, you know, I told you I was at that halfway house for a year and 3 weeks. And so about May of 2002, I received a call from a lady who was my counselor at that treatment center and said, "Hey, the CEO wants to talk to you. And can you make some time to come down and talk to him?" So I went down, put my Dockers on, put my Cole Haan shoes on. And went down and met with him. And he knew a little bit about my history. And he said, "Hey, listen, we've never had anybody to do outreach work for us, to go out and tell the story of our program. You're a success story, and we want to hire you to go out and represent us and tell that story, and be a resource for people who need help, provide resources to therapists and psychiatrists, and do outreach work." And I'd never done that in the addiction treatment industry, but it sounded a whole lot similar to what I had always done in my work. A whole lot similar.
Right. A lot of crossover.
So he started, yeah, sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
And he started explaining the nuances of the job and the work. And it occurred to me at that moment that everything that I had done professionally and personally, all my successes and my failures, had prepared me for that job at that very moment.
Mm-hmm.
That the skills that were necessary to be successful in that role, I acquired those skills through my life's journey.
Right.
I just needed a little bit more. I needed some more education. And I eventually went back to school and got licensed as a chemical dependency intern in Texas. Texas is not a certificate program for addiction counselors; it's a license, and it's a very rigorous process that they put you through. And so, 4,000-hour internship. If you don't have a master's, if you have a master's, it's 1,000-hour internship. It's a big deal. They require a lot. But yeah, I went to work for that program in 2002, in May of 2002. And I worked there until 2005, May of 2005. I left and moved to Florida because that's where she lived. I had met her, and and I moved down there. I moved to Fort Lauderdale, North Lauderdale, and went to work for the watershed in 2005. And so I'd gotten divorced, and that was a real painful process. But I had embarked on an entirely new life in a place where I didn't know many people, but I stepped out on faith that this was God's plan for me. And so hurricanes came that year. That was a year of Hurricane Wilma, Hurricane Katrina. They were at a lot of storms. Yeah. And so Sylvia had said, "Hey, listen, if you can find work in Texas, I'm willing to move to Texas." She had previously told me she would never move to Abilene. She had come to visit me in Abilene.
Right.
And
but Dallas is a different story.
That's a different story. Yeah. She says, "I'll never move to Abilene." In fact, she said she would never move to Texas. When I first met her, she said, "I would never move to Texas." And I said, "You know what? I would never move to Florida." Yeah. And I ended up moving to Florida, and she ended up moving to Texas. But yeah, so that year of the storms, I decided I didn't want to live in South Florida. So the CEO at the place where I'd worked before had told me, "If you ever want to come back here, you call me." So I called him, and he said, "Yeah, come on back here." Actually, he had called me to ask me about how we were doing in the storms. And I told him what Sylvia said. And he said, "Well, let's chat next week." And so I called him, went back in January of 2006. Went back to work there, and I stayed there until 2012. And then I went to work at Origins in 2012. It's been a great journey, man.
Yeah. For me, I also owe the IRS a lot of money, and for anyone who's been down that path, and I know there are a few of us that have, that is a very daunting thing. For me, it was a very soul crushing thing, and then to have to deal with that. But for me, you talk about a higher power. I had no concept of that. Even though I grew up in a family which we attended synagogue, we, the holidays, and we were involved, that I never considered what that meant to me. And when I was in treatment, my counselor asked me, he said, "Do you pray?" And I said, "Do I what?" And he said, "Forget it." He said, "When you wake up in the morning, say please, and when you go to bed at night, say thank you." And I really had no experience in a higher power or a spiritual life, or wanted to seek a spiritual life. But once you see it, once you're introduced to it, it is something that you do highly value. I mean, I know I do. Yeah,
absolutely. It is, as I mentioned earlier, there's so much freedom in knowing that I don't have to be in control. I just don't. And the whole trust issue, I let that go a long time ago. because
Mhm.
it is putting putting my life in the care of God's hands has never failed me.
Mhm. Mhm.
Putting my life in my own hands
Mm.
has failed me multiple times.
Yes.
And so the evidence is real clear to me
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
Rick, no, God, yes. And
Yeah.
so I have no doubt in my mind. There's no question in my mind that the path that I've been on has been led, and it hadn't always been what I wanted.
Mhm.
In
Mhm.
fact, it almost never is exactly what I think I want.
Mhm.
I don't know what I want. I used to think that I knew what I wanted.
Mhm.
There are things that I think I want,
Right.
but I don't know what I want.
Right.
And so I'm careful to go pursuing what I think I want.
Right.
And I'm more careful to follow my instincts as to what God's will is for me. And
Right.
it's a difficult thing for me to ascertain at
Yeah.
times.
Yeah.
My desires versus God's will for me. And
Yeah.
but what I found is that I'm never going to miss if I follow God's will for me, and that is what is easier to achieve, what is effortless to obtain. When I'm struggling to try to get something or achieve a goal, it's probably
Some kind
not
of
God's will.
control. Yeah. 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 And there's a difference between praying when I'm praying and I'm really issuing God an instruction,
I
a
demand.
list of a demand list. Yeah. Yeah. A letter of intent. This is what I need. And if you would please follow as opposed to surrendering to look, that was a big thing for me because, coming from the field I came from, that we came from, the idea of surrendering control is very foreign, and being at Clear Fork this weekend, yesterday, I thought back to what it was like being at, commercial real estate conferences and stuff like that. The idea that we're going to sit around the table and tell our stories and share our vulnerability and why we're here and have that spiritual moment with each other, there just was none of that. And to be in this life where even though we're here, we run businesses, we're here for professional reasons, but we can connect on a different level, is such a blessing.
Yeah, it is. It is.
Yeah.
That IRS debt, which seemed such an insurmountable obstacle.
Yeah.
I was fearful of even trying to do anything with that.
Mhm.
And so I started getting letters forwarded to me to that halfway house, to that sober living, from the IRS.
Yeah.
And I talked to my sponsor. I said, well, there's no point in me calling them because I don't make enough money to even pay. And he says, well, call them and tell them that.
Mm-hmm.
So I did.
Mm-hmm.
Prayed before I did. Called him. The guy did a little phone analysis of my financial situation. He said, I tell you what, we're going to set you up on a payment plan.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking, okay, $264,000. What is that payment plan going to look like?
Right.
He said,
Right.
we're going to put you on $50 a month.
Wow. No.
And I said, okay, all right. And he never said, we're going to freeze the interest.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to waive the penalties. He never said any of that.
Right. Right.
But that's what I'm thinking. This isn't enough to cover the interest.
Right.
But I made the payment every month on time. And for some reason, somehow, principal amounts from years prior started going away, because they give you a statement on your outstanding balance every time you make a payment. They send in a statement. Mm-hmm. And rather than it going up with interest, it started going down more than what I was paying. And there was some provision that this guy had that would allow him to eliminate previous interest accumulations. Because so much of that 264,000 was probably only 120 in principal.
Yeah.
The rest was penalty and interest.
Fees, yeah.
I sent them a check for 10,000 or something, a little more than 10,000 about 4 or 5 years ago to pay out. That was my last payment. Wow. And I was happy to pay those people.
Yeah.
And so listen, somebody asked me if the steps work. I tell them steps work better than anything I've ever tried. I would recommend the 12 steps for anybody, whether you're an alcoholic or an addict or not. Take the 12 steps.
Right.
They work.
Right. It's a guide for living. Yeah. Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that. That's an incredible story. And I know that so many people in the field look up to you, and you're doing a great job. And, Origins is it is the benchmark in the Southeast. So,
thank you.
Thank you for sharing. Thank you for being an inspiration. So,
thank you for having me.
Yeah. Thanks for being here. And I'm going to look forward to seeing you soon.
All right, Mark. Good to see you, my friend.
Good to see you. Thank you. Take care.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.